a couple
Oh,
of
my
weeks ago,
goodness.
and he needs some help. So yeah, so I'm remote helping him and doing this while I'm doing that. So
Cool. All right. Looks like we're live, so I'll go high.
sounds good.
All right, well, you can go ahead and.
Okay, so good evening, everyone, and welcome to those of you that were here this evening, as well as to those of you who are listening to the Duxbury Free Library's final candidate forum for the 2024 municipal election. My name is Amy MacNab. I am a current member of your select board. I was a member of the planning board for 14 years, 7 or 8 of which I was the chair. It is interesting to note that currently 3 of the sitting members on the select board were longtime members of the planning board. So it really is an important position in town. I'd like to thank Martha and the Duxbury Library trustees and the library for hosting these important forums, which are so helpful to our residents. And I thank all of you for running for this position. It's an honorable thing to do, and we appreciate it. The town will elect 2 new members to the planning board on March 23rd, 24. That's this Saturday. And currently we have 6 candidates for 2 open seats on the board. And they are Robert Carpenter, Matthew Roy, Doug Carver, Lauren Sirois, Glenn Carle, and Stephen Gandt. We're pleased to have many of the candidates here with us this evening for the discussion of the issues important to the Duxbury Planning Board, so we can inform the voters and help them make their decision. Welcome tonight to candidates Lauren Sirois, Robert Tad Carpenter, Matthew Ray, apologize, Stephen Gandt, and Glenn Carle, who is joining us via Zoom.
No,
Glenn Carle and Stephen Gandt is joining us via Zoom. Doug
Great,
Carver
thank you.
Doug Carver can't be with us this evening as he had pre-planned travel. So we've prepared some questions which the candidates have been provided ahead of this forum tonight. We're going to alternate who is asked to respond first, and we ask you to limit your responses to 2 minutes. So first, we're just going to ask you to introduce yourselves by telling us a little bit about yourself and what experiences have brought you to seek a position on the planning board. We're going to start with Mr. Carle.
Thank you, Amy. Well, I'm Glenn Carle. I was born and raised in Brookline, not too far away. And I stayed in town to go to college. I jumped all the way across the Charles River to Harvard. And that's one of the reasons why I ended up not living in Boston or Massachusetts for the 30 years or 35 years of my career, because I had only gone 3.5 miles away from my home to go to college. I was in the diplomatic service. I was an intelligence officer. So for really my adult life, I lived a good part of it in different countries, and then alternating, going back to Washington, D.C. I've been in Duxbury for, shockingly to me, a decade already. Time goes very fast. And I've been progressively involved, or becoming involved in town affairs. And I either have to thank or blame Amy MacNab for that, because I sent her a note after I read something she had said in the Clipper, saying, I agree with this. This is really great. Keep it up. And her thanks was to tell me I should become a member of to nominate me for the Alternative Energy Committee, where I have been fascinated to be involved for the last 2 years now. And I'm sitting here tonight because 2 months ago, I guess, I'm not sure how long ago it was, I read in the Clipper that no one was running for the planning board. And I thought, this is just appalling. And the whole town will sort of grind to a halt if the vital functions aren't performed. And to be honest, I had not given any thought, zero, to running for the planning board prior to seeing that no one was going to do it. And I thought that was just really not acceptable. So I scrambled around, collected the requisite signatures, and here I am. And I found out the day after I submitted them that 5 other people stood up. So that's why I'm sitting here, and how I came to be in Duxbury.
Thank you. We'll go down the line, so.
Okay. Thanks, Glenn. Thank you, Amy. I'm Tag Carpenter. Robert Taggart Carpenter is my legal name, and you'll see it on a couple of signs I put up around town. I'm a lifelong Duxbury resident. I had a 40-year career in information technology, software development, systems integration, project management, that type of thing. Primarily federal government contracting, some off-the-shelf software, and some bespoke enterprise systems. And I apologize if I descend into jargon. I have a lot of jargon, so stop me if it becomes opaque. But my involvement with town government really started, well, I've done contracting for the town off and on throughout my career, supporting information technology upgrades and the like, student intern when I was young. But really, you know, I've always been interested in attending town meeting, attended as often as I could, and as I've grown older and had more available time, my daughter graduated and left the house, and I became involved in the preservation of the Tarleton Twin schoolhouses because it's next door to my house, and I saw the impact that it had on the community when it closed. And long story short, you know, did the necessary work to get articles through town meeting and work directly with the government to get that project accomplished. And then through that, I was invited to, encouraged to join the Historical Commission, and I've chaired the Historical Commission now for a few years. I've been on it for over a decade. Helped organize that work. It's been incredibly educational to learn about the amazing history here in Duxbury, something that we sort of take for granted, or I certainly have as a lifelong resident. And learn really how the government actually works and the role that the volunteers play. If it wasn't for the volunteers and all the committee members that put their personal time, you know, into caring about the issues of the town and communicating with the government, it wouldn't work as well as it does. So I'm been invited to serve on the planning board and interested in doing so because I think I can make a meaningful contribution. So I'll stop there.
Right.
Thank you. Mr. Ray.
Thanks, Nick. That was good. My name's Matthew Ray. I am well, we moved to town in 2010, so we've been here for 14 years. I got my undergraduate degree at Assumption University in Worcester, and then I got my MBA and law degree at Suffolk University in 2005. So I've been practicing as a commercial real estate attorney for about 19 years now. And my practice brings me in front of planning boards in other towns and throughout the Commonwealth and represent a lot of developers that deal with development of properties and planning boards. So throughout the years, I have coached various sports teams in town, but have been looking for an opportunity to give back to the town and have been looking and following the openings at various town boards, but wanted to pick one where my contributions would be meaningful. When I saw the planning board had openings, it just kind of made sense where it aligned well with my skills, my experience, and put my name in the ring to try and you know, give back to the town that has given a lot to myself and my family. We plan to stay here for a while, and I can't think really of a more appropriate board that has direct footprint on the future development and growth of the town than the planning board. So that's was my choice.
Thank you. Ms. Sirois.
My name's Lauren Sirois. I grew up on Cape Cod, did college in Providence and Brookline, and found my way to Duxbury in 2012, moved here with my husband and my son Luke. In 2016, we welcomed my daughter Gracie. And when we moved here, I was looking for just that quaint small town charm that I kind of grew up with and found at the Mashpee on the Cape. And on top of that, we were moving out of Boston actually at the time. We wanted a school system that just really cared about their kids. And we fell in love with Duxbury right away. My husband had actually spent a few years here, knew everything about it, showed me around, showed me the beaches, showed me the boating and everything that Duxbury has to offer. So we made ourselves a home here. And throughout, I guess, I started going back to work 2014, let's say, in the architecture industry. And throughout that portion of my career, I found myself, again, just like Matt, in front of a lot of planning boards, presenting different designs for developers and mostly retailers, and just really learning that process. and really falling in love with the towns, the ability to shape their town. And I decided to join that point, it was actually just a few years ago, decided to join the design board. Amy actually interviewed me for it a few years, maybe 2 years ago now. And she encouraged me to just take the next step, to go to the planning board. And I truly feel like it's my way to give back. I have a background in architecture, a background in construction management, and I think that my skills can really, really help shape this town.
Thank you. And Mr. Gantt.
Great, thank you, Amy. Yes, hi, my name is Stephen Gantt. I've lived in Duxbury for, I think, about 26 years with my wife and my 5 kids. My wife has lived in Duxbury since she was in high school, and I'm a transplant after we got married. All of our kids have come up through the Duxbury school system. I've volunteered for many years with the Boy Scouts and the Cub Scouts here in town. I was on the board of directors for a few years at with Duxbury Youth Soccer. So I've got a pretty deep experience volunteering in town, yet not at the town level. Went to school at the College of the Holy Cross in Worcester. Got my master's degree at Boston College, both in economics. I have about almost a 30-year career in the commercial real estate industry in a couple of different capacities, on the equity side, then on the lending side, and now in the community development side with the Massachusetts Housing Partnership. So I've got a lot of experience working with different developers, owners nationwide, as well as here in Massachusetts. I've been with the Massachusetts Housing Partnership for the past 6 years or so, and have a lot of experience working with development budgets, with site plans, with comprehensive permits, with project eligibility letters, a lot of really local hands-on development work at the town and the city level here in Massachusetts. And so I really want to bring that experience to bear, and what I can continue to give back to the town. So thank you very much. Looking forward to the rest of the forum here.
Thank you. Our next question, and we're going to start with Mr. Carpenter, who's going to rotate here. The next question is from a former planning board member, now a select board member, Mr. Brian Glennon. And his question is, have you had an opportunity to review the town's comprehensive plan, Envision Duxbury? And do you have thoughts as to how the town should go about implementing the plan's recommendations?
Sure, thank you, Amy. Participated in the formulation of the Envision Duxbury plan through the Historical Commission, and have read most of it. It's a sprawling document. It's a lot to take in, and I'm an implementer and a hands-on person, and I naturally gravitated towards the implementation section last quarter of the document, which breaks out essentially the conclusions and the action items that the town needs to take to implement the plan. And even that, there were over 250 or so individual action items, each of which is an owner identified and supporting entities and some description within a context of a hierarchy. And so in order to really get a handle on it myself and assist the Historical Commission and the other boards, I took the time to take that table and convert it into a spreadsheet. So I created a database essentially that allows us to now track the progress of the action items as we go forward. So as far as the implementation of the plan, all the boards and committee chairs are providing updates to that, and that was completed over the summertime. So we're at a point now where we can actually sort of know where we are and see where we need to go, because it's a 10-year plan and we're 5 years into it. The standard, as I understand it, is that this is time to revisit it, to identify things that have changed, and the plan was really completed right when COVID hit. So situation's pretty different now. So one of the things that I want to do in terms of implementation is collect all that feedback, get it compiled into some kind of report that the town can consume so that we know where we are, and then generate some kind of forums or some way to engage the community in a conversation about those goals. Are they still appropriate? What should we be considering in addition to what was formulated 5 years ago, in alignment with all the principles laid out in the plan? So there's a ton of work to be done there. And I'm interested in rolling my sleeves up and continuing with that.
Thank you. We'll go down the line again.
Sure, great. It's 275 pages of reading in the Envision plan. There's a lot in there. But I do think after reviewing it, it hits on four overarching themes. Composition of the trust of the housing in the city, in the town. Lack of affordable housing, lack of multifamily, and trying to convert some of the single family uses. One of the big things. Also updating the recreation and open space areas in the town was an overarching theme I saw in the Envision plan. The coastal resiliency and climate change was a third. Excuse me. And then, and how those will affect the economies that rely on the ocean and the coast. So in terms of implementation of those, the planning board can't do it on its own. It has to be in conjunction with all of the other select boards. I do think that we are 5 years into the 10-year plan, but a lot of especially with regards to the composition of the housing in town, that's hot button items now. And some of the things that we'll probably discuss here as the demographics of the town start to shift. The town is an aging population, as was noted in the Envision Duxbury, and it's also a growing population. I think based on the 2020 census, it's about 6,200 families or residences in the town now, which has grown from low 5,000s. So the town's growing, the population is aging. However, we also want to make it affordable for younger families to come in. So that I think is a big up. I think secondly, I think we can all see that the town needs safer bike walkways. And how do we incorporate that and make that, safer it's a recreational town. A lot of people are walking, a lot of people are running. There's a lot of great conservation land in the beach and the waterways. So I think that is also a hot button item vis-a-vis the expected rise in sea levels. So there's a lot of meaty issues that the planning board's going to have their hands in, but they're not going to be able to do it on its own. So in terms of implementation, they're going to have to work with the select board. They're going to have to work with Concom, Historical Commission for the preservation of all the historic homes in town, while you also try to tackle the conversion of some of those historic or single family homes to maybe multifamily homes to address the changing demographic in town. So there's a lot in the Envision Duxbury plan. I think a lot of it is great for the future growth and development of the town. But again, the planning board should be an integral part in that, but they're not going to be able to do it on its own in terms of implementation.
Ms. Roy.
I admit I have not read all 275 pages, but I've got through most of it. I accidentally printed out 11 by 17, so it's giant sitting on my desk at work. I will get through it for the next few weeks. In terms of getting through to implement everything, I would break it down personally like a project I break down at work. You do it into phases. So you break out, we have these task force and these committees that have a piece of this Envision Duxbury. You task them with going back to folks in town, breaking down exactly, is this correct? Do we need to revisit it? Do we need to revise it since COVID happened? Have them, those individual pieces, break them down. You give them deadlines, review with them, come back, planning board reviews, and then as possible, if possible, we review with the other boards, with select board and everybody else, and implement baby steps. It's not going to happen all at once, but if we break it down into manageable tasks, we can do it.
Thank you. Mr. Gandt.
Great, thank you. I've taken a look through the plan. Obviously, everyone's identified that it's quite long, but I think there are some key themes that really distill out of it, and I really want to focus on two of them. One is climate resiliency, and the other really is housing. These are really, I think, going to be the priorities that we need to focus on. Rising sea level in Duxbury is going to be critically important, and so working with, on the planning board. Working with owners and developers who are going to be who have these the waterfront homes who are going to be affected by the sea rise. We want to make sure that we're doing everything that we can to allow them to make their properties as resilient as they can be with regard to the rising water levels within town. So that to me is one of the key items. The other one, of course, is going to be housing. The plan was developed in 2019, obviously. And we've had, and during that time, we've had the Massachusetts MBTA Communities Law passed, which I think really throws a wrench into the plans that we've developed with respect to high density housing within the town. And so I think implementing the MBTA communities law is going to be a key part of the revisions that we would need to make to the master plan. And I look forward to talking a little bit more about the Massachusetts communities law and how we're going to approach that. But that I think is another key area where we need to look at making revisions to the plan and making sure that the rest of the plan is harmonized well with the MBTA's community laws requirements.
Thanks. My involvement or familiarity with the Envision Duxbury comes primarily through my work on the Alternative Energy Committee, where it has become, I think, overwhelmingly clear that one cannot separate the work of the Alternative Energy Committee to address town and residents in towns issues concerning energy, their residences with the coastal resiliency work. So Mr. Gandt, I think made a point that I would agree with completely. That links to the obligations for more diversity in housing and the density thereof. And what I found the lesson, I think, that I've drawn from our struggles to move forward on the energy use in the town, both for economic and environmental reasons on resiliency issues, is that we need to be modest in our aims, meaning choose several specific tasks, such as in our case, in my work in the Energy Committee, a green aggregation plan that would embrace the entire town, rather than compiling or trying to act upon yet another list of here are issues that are complex and necessary to address. And I think that's, Envision Duxbury says, here's the wish list of issues that are important and what we need to do. But we have struggled to have effect by being too dispersed in identifying problems, then punting issues to the board, to the select board. I think it's better for each committee, the planning board, to choose 2 or 3 issues, address those that will be the most significant ones, and then with that achieved, move on to the next thing. So for the planning board, it could well be, we will prioritize in the coming 18 months or 24 months, whatever period we want, how we can address the town's obligations in regard to diversity of housing, and do that in a way that meets social, economic needs, density needs, environmental needs, and energy needs together. That would address a lot of things and would take probably more bandwidth than we would have during the term, even, and then go from there to the next priority. It's having executive authority and acting upon specific issues rather than continuing to identify problems and then compiling another target list, I think is more effective or short.
Thank you. I'm going to go off script here and ask a bit of a follow-up question to that one. And it's a real kind of a yes or no. We started with, so we'll start with Mr. Ray. And the question is, should our zoning bylaws be reflective of and in line with the goals of the comprehensive plan?
Excuse me. I think yes, to the extent they're not now, but with a forward-looking basis. You can't say we look back at a report that was done based off responses of 5 years ago and look back and try to amend our zoning bylaws now to match that of Envision Duxbury. I think yes, it has to be done, but 2, it needs to look out 5 to 10 years. As an attorney that deals a lot with zoning work in my commercial real estate practice, a lot of it is trying to fit projects into somewhat archaic zoning bylaws. So yes, the answer to your question is, but 2 is those zoning bylaws need to be amended with forethought of what is coming down the pike in terms of rising sea level that's addressed in Envision Duxbury and changing in demographics in need for housing and affordable housing if that is needed, or multifamily housing. So yeah, I do.
Yes, absolutely. Again, I do think that it needs to be revisited. It's been 5 years. A lot has changed. The world has changed. We need to take another look and make sure that it does align with what our neighbors want to see, but absolutely, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Gantt.
Yes, I think the answer is absolutely yes. I think we also need to remember too, that we also, there's in addition to the 274-page Envision Duxbury, we also have a 104-page Duxbury Housing Production Plan that was produced around the same time. And so what we would need to do, of course, is we would need to make sure that the Duxbury Housing Production Plan is harmonized with Envision Duxbury to make sure that we're as consistent as we can be, while at the same time achieving the goals that we're looking to achieve.
Thank you. Mr. Carle.
Yeah, I think Envision Duxbury sets out fine objectives, and to do it in harmony with how things have changed. It should be over the past 5 years, I think, is a matter of course. No plan survives the first step of implementation or discussion. So yeah, yes, do it in line as much as possible, but obviously amending to the circumstance.
Mr. Carpenter.
Well, I think we're unanimous. Clearly, the bylaws need to be revised. To Matthew's point, yeah, a lot of effort is expended, certainly to design projects that are both economically and, socially, for lack of a better term, successful in their target communities. But I think the real point is that the Envision Plan lays out not only a suite of bylaw changes that need to be made, but also changes to the actual administration and activities of the town in order to identify sources of funding, in order to put the infrastructure in place so that those projects can essentially be accelerated or streamlined. So all of that work has to be done. If you can't do a project because of the bylaw, then we have to change the bylaw so we can do the project. Obviously, there's the 40B that can create exceptions. There's the multifamily zoning, which I don't know if this is the time to talk about it, but so I see it as, interlocking parts, and we have to address them all. And the difficulty, of course, is that we've been working on zoning bylaw recodification since 2012. And as far as I'm concerned, that just needs to be done. We need to pass recodification. We need to pass MBTA communities, it looks like right now, and be prepared to do that this fall, and then go from there. So, yes.
Thank you. Next question. Development pressures have never been greater. How will you balance these development pressures while maintaining Duxbury's rural and historic character? Let's start with you, Mr.
So this is probably one of the greatest reasons why I decided to run for this position. Being surrounded by development, and I can't say that I'm for it or against it, but I want to learn more about it. I will do my due diligence, let's say, to understand all of the pressure and what we can and cannot do. I do think this goes back to the bylaws that need to be adjusted and refined to what Duxbury wants. I also would really love to see the design review board and the historical commission and any other board that can set standards for Duxbury. There's towns like Nantucket who have certain standards so they can keep that rural community, that look that they want.
Thank you. Oh, Mr. Gantt.
Well, as they say in life, everything, there are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. And so when we look at what is being done in Duxbury with regard to development, I have to say I'm very pleased with how the town has managed development in town so far. We're about to be faced with particularly with respect to housing. We're faced with a change that's going to be taking place with regard to the MBTA communities law. It's going to be a seismic change with respect to what is going to be possible to develop in Duxbury. And so that, I think, is really going to be our touchstone for how we're going to be managing development in the town going forward. This, in my mind, is the biggest priority that we have, and managing the development that can or will take place on the parcels that we identify for compliance with that law. That is going to be by far, in my mind, the most important focus for the planning board and for other departments, other boards within town, with respect to how that's going to be developed and how we're going to be developing that, while at the same time really maintaining in Duxbury what it is that makes the town great with respect to things like the school system, with respect to its historic resources, with respect to its resiliency, with respect to the people that we have in town right now. So that's my priority for with respect to balancing the development with the town's rural character.
Thank you. Mr. Carle.
I suspect that with quality school systems, the rural and historic character, as it was put in the question, of Duxbury is the principal reason for why most of us live here. Certainly, I discovered that when I came to live here a decade ago, and prize it so much that I'm going to stay here and had not intended to do so a decade ago when I first arrived. I think there's no simple answer to how one does that, although I anticipate or think that the way the development has occurred in the decade I've been here, in particular around Millbrook, is seemingly to me a model to emulate or continue, which seems to concentrate economic development in the three principal economic quarters, neighborhoods of the town, while enthusiastically, at least in my part, and I think on most other people's parts, supporting the work of the preservation committees, both historically and environmentally, rather than dispersing development as, and I might be speaking with insufficient knowledge of what happened here, but the development occurring, I forget the name of the road, the rotary just before Route 3 on Route 14, when you go left, there's development occurring where they just sort of clear cut acres and acres of forest. And housing may be necessary for social, economic, and all sorts of other reasons. But I would have preferred, I think, to have housing occur nearer of that sort of denser development, nearer one of the economic zones, I'll call them, rather than in the middle of the town's.
That's a 40B development. Yeah.
We've done it by Millbrook.
Mr. Carpenter.
How to support development, creation of housing, keeping the character of the town. I was just reviewing the action items for the planning board under the vision plan, and there's actually a lot of overlap with that economic development committee in terms of there are 8 neighborhood business districts in town, and when I think the only one that actually features some housing mixed with commercial is Hall's Corner. And it is kind of the centerpiece of our neighborhood business districts. There's a current Hall's Corner Study Committee RFP that is out, and that will generate results. The last time we looked at Hall's Corner, they really only talked about parking. Pretty disappointing. So again, the bylaws have to be changed to enable housing in neighborhood business districts. That's part of the objectives of the plan. And the design standards, as it's mentioned, it's been difficult, frankly, to formalize any idea of a design standard because, frankly, I feel that we're a freedom-loving community. It should be up to the owners to decide, and we should do everything we can to encourage them to be consistent with the style of the town and work with us. But I don't think that the government should be coercive in any way in terms of forcing decisions about design. That's a little bit of a bridge too far, as I understand it. So it's a balancing. It's finesse, and part of that formula does have to do with the way the process is set up, the way the funding sources are identified, because you want to influence the process without controlling the process. And that.
Thank you. Mr. Ray.
Sure. I think in order to address the question, development pressures vis-a-vis the rural and historic character of the town, you gotta look at it 2 things. The rural and historic character of the town, I think, is what brought a lot of us here and what we enjoy living. A lot of beautiful historic houses, a lot of rural and recreational and open space. Okay, but to answer the question, how do we really define what is development pressures in this context? I don't think development pressures in this context of the question is single family home development. I mean, the zoning right now, I believe, is a minimum 40,000 square foot per residential lot. So we're really talking about affordable housing, 40B, as well as commercial development when we try to talk about development pressure per se. In terms of the 40B, which I think Glenn had just brought up, a development, for so long as the town remains under that 10% subsidized housing inventory, we do remain subject or open to 40B developments that can have the ability to bypass all these, these new zoning bylaws or planning board initiatives that we're trying to implement. So I do think that the affordable housing stock in town is going to be a crucial topic as we kind of vis-a-vis development pressures versus the rural and historic aspect of the town. The second one is the changing demographics, and I believe Doug might have brought up the MBT zoning act. As we know, Duxbury is an adjacent community. So what that means is we need to have at least 750 minimum 750 affordable units over 50 acres, and it needs to be passed by the end of this year. As we saw in the town of Milton, there are significant ramifications. I don't want to go too far down the path of this particular law, but that's going to come into play. So I think those are the development pressures versus the rural and historic. I think it's multifamily, it's affordable housing, and it is trying to get some more commercial development in the business districts and towns. And I think I have seen on projects for my own clients and other municipalities, mixed use is a great, if you can get it done, commercial with residential above. And we have seen that to some success in town, in Millbrook, and in Hall's Corner. So I think that's an answer. So I think those are the three kind of real issues when you start to talk about development pressures versus the character of the town.
Thank you. Next question. What role do you think the planning board should play regarding coastal resiliency? I think we started with you last time, Mr. So, Mr. Gantt.
Great, thank you. The key thing that the planning board has to do with respect to resiliency is we have to make it easy, or as easy as it can possibly be, for owners, for businesses that have properties that are going to be affected by sea level rise, to make the modifications that they need to make to their properties so that they can adjust to the rise in sea level. Whether that's being able to put buildings on pilings, whether that's relocating buildings if that's possible where they're located, whether that's giving them some kind of, if they want to redevelop the property into something different, allowing them to do that so that it has an alternative use that is going to be more resilient than the current use that's there right now. The objective that the board needs to have is we need to make that as simple as it can be, while at the same time retaining as much of going back to the previous question, retaining as much of the rural character in town as we possibly can. But really facilitating the review process, accelerating the review process, and allowing them to giving them as much leeway as we reasonably can to make the modifications that they need to make to maintain to improve their resilience. I think that's going to be the key focus of the board with respect to resilience.
Thank you.
The points just made, I think, are the practical ones that have arisen. I don't mean to make a pun by choosing arisen, talking about coastal resiliency. In the discussions in which I've been involved with the Resiliency Committee and the Alternative Energy Committee on how to respond to the rise of sea level, I wouldn't want to, this is a broad statement, and I don't know how to actuate it in detail, but I wouldn't want us to fall into the, I think, error of literally trying to fight a rising tide by taking measures that they didn't respond to, but rather tried to stop the effects of. Whether that means, what that means with regard to specific homes or buildings along the coast or roads, I'm not certain, but just building a wall and trying to stop the effects is a fool's errand possible. So assist in evolving to the change sea level, yes. Helping to maintain the status quo, of course, cannot.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter.
Well, it's a difficult subject in terms of coastal resiliency. The planning board, again, I have to sort of insist that, it's a volunteer board of 7 members. And their primary charge is reviewing building permit applications and all of the technicalities that go along. So while we want it to do so much, it's very limited in what it can actually do. The Coastal Resilience Task Force, of course, is the lead body on this. I would like to see the planning board gather in support of what the Coastal Resiliency Task Force is doing, gather more of the actual examples from other communities in similar situations. And Duxbury is in a very unique situation because of the very beach, the extensive shallow bay, the exposure along the coast, and the freshwater rivers flowing into the bay. It's a very distinct situation, and we rely so heavily on the bay for our economic well-being here in the town. So the planning board has a complex role to play in this, and I hesitate to try and prescribe that in a 2-minute answer to a question. It requires the long view. I prefer to take the long view, and I have to share with you that it is difficult. It is increasingly difficult because climate models tend to be a little optimistic and underestimate future risk. And if you reverse that and take the pessimistic view, I agree a little bit with Mr. Carle that it requires much more vigorous action sooner than we think. That's the worst case scenario. You have to plan for the worst and hope for the best. And that's what I would like to see the planning board do, is take the longer view.
But the trends of sea rise and global warming have exceeded all of the worst estimates by all of the most respected bodies.
Correct, because the models are watered down.
Thank you. Mr. Ray.
Sure. I mean, I think we've all driven down Washington Street and seen more frequency of the flooding on the streets. Planning board, as Tag correctly just pointed out, the goal of the planning board is to encourage development with coastal resiliency in mind. I think we can't do that without also, never mind the homeowners, they obviously have to be a part of the conversation that whose property directly, but it also has to, we also have to bring in voices from the community, from the business community that directly, relies on the coast. We also have to factor in what the beach reservation does in terms of the dune, because without that barrier beach, I think now we're talking of the whole shape of the conversation changes. So it's important that the barrier beach remains. In terms of what the planning board can do with regards to coastal resiliency, I think it is to help work with the task force, work with the other departments in town to make sure that we have planning board regulations, we have zoning bylaws that with the forethought of rising sea levels, but still balances the development, especially from a commercial economic perspective.
Thank you, Ms. Roy.
I think that the first thing for the planning board to do is to make sure that all of the projects that come before them are not contributing to climate change. I think that we need to take a hard look at our stormwater management system, make sure that the culverts are correctly maintained, make sure that they're in the correct spots. We also need to maintain our wetland areas and really protect those. And then the last would be to evaluate every project that comes through and just to make sure that it's not inhibiting on any of the habitats that's around there and to make sure that they're safe.
Thank you. Next question. What do you believe are currently the top 3 pressing issues facing the planning board? I think they're probably placing Duxbury in the planning board, or basically the question is the planning board. And we started with Mr. Gantt, we're back to Mr. Carle.
Well, I think we've touched upon them repeatedly. I think they emerged as all of us have given our answers. In which order, I'm not certain to place them, but how to manage the required and desired economic development in housing, and while maintaining the semi-rural nature of Duxbury. Second, the resiliency issue you were just touching upon, which is really how to respond to global warming. And then third, and of course we stand where we sit, or we sit where we stand. And so I'll tout my own work on the Alternative Energy Committee. I think it's critical to take this comprehensive, holistic approach to how the town, from the most modest home to the town's government functions and schools and so on, address their energy use, which will shape, if not define, their economic and physical development. So those are the three things I would say.
Thank you, Mr. Carpenter.
I guess perhaps I'm conflating issues and action items. I see it in terms of the short term. This year, again, we have to pass recodification, we have to address MBTA communities, and that's really all we can expect to do at town meeting. But secondly, I think that the planning board really has to reset the table, reset the clock. We're operating without a town planner right now. I like to invoke the ship of state metaphor. We have a very capable captain, but we lack a navigator. So the planning board has to fulfill that role, has to do whatever we can as volunteers with the support of professionals to really focus the limited effort that we have for the maximum benefit. And it has to be focused on the issues of zoning, and they have to do with all of the housing. We've touched on affordable housing, accessory dwelling units. We have to be prepared to address short-term rentals in some way, not this year, but probably next year. So there's groundwork that has to be done to support identifying the policy objectives, and then from there, the zoning bylaw changes that have to take place. So, finally, these coastal resiliency and climate change, and in the state level, they talk about decarbonization. Those are also interrelated issues, and I want to tell a brief story. In February, my furnace failed. I have an oil-fired hot air furnace, and so we were in a situation without heat in cold weather and had to scramble, and I was dedicated to eliminating the fossil fuel burning in my home. So I solicited quotes from vendors for air source heat pumps and replacements of the oil-fired furnace. And I did the math, and it is not economically feasible to go to air source heat pumps because they require backup electric heat strips, and they consume an inordinate amount of electrical energy. And the electrical energy is generated by, guess what? Fossil fuels at a distance. So you're just displacing a local source with a greater distance source. So we bit the bullet and put another furnace in, and I identified that the correct solution is ground source heat pumps, because that does not suffer the degradation of performance in the winter. So from this experience, one of my objectives would be to identify policies that a town can put in place and funding sources to create a program whereby we can aggressively work to replace in-home oil-fired furnaces with ground source heat pumps. It's much more capital intensive because of the groundwork that has to be done, but it's the best solution available today. These are the types of things that I would like to see the town of Duxbury do: move the needle, find solutions, and enact policies that can advance our objectives. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't know that my answer is in order of importance, and I think we've probably got hit on a lot of them anyways, but I break them down into housing, and where I say generally housing, affordable unit housing needs to be consciously added. For so long as the town remains below that 10% threshold, we are at the mercy of developers in 40B. I think that's important. The second part of housing, and we've touched on it numerous times tonight, is multifamily, or at least some sort of housing that addresses the changing composition in the town. I think we can't ignore that. The town is aging, it's an aging population, but we also want to be able to have housing that affords younger families to move into town. That's how the town continues to grow. So from that, in terms of housing, those are the two issues. Secondly, I say maintenance, improvement, development / of open recreational areas. And where I lump under that is sidewalks. I mean, this is a beautiful town. Everybody walks, runs, but it's dangerous if you're out running and walking, and whether you're paying attention or you're not. It's an important, and I know it's a hot button item, but improving sidewalks and able to exercise, as well as maintaining all of the beautiful conservation lands. And then the sports fields in town. As someone with young kids and family, we have beautiful space, but some of the sports fields need upkeep or development or improvement. And then lastly, I would say we've already touched on it, is the overarching level sea rise, coastal resiliency, the economy of Duxbury that relies on the coastal resiliency, and how does that all play into housing development? I think those are the three overarching items facing the planning board.
Thank you, Ms. Sirois.
So I think the first two we've talked about a lot, the areas of development, and then coastal resiliency. The last thing that Matt, you touched a little bit on it, community health. sidewalks, preserving our open spaces, our nature trails, and also for protecting our drinking water. I'm not sure how much the planning board can do for that, but it's a very upcoming issue, and I'd like to see figure out what we can do for it.
Mr. Gantt.
Thanks, Amy. Yeah, the three items really, I think, that are the most pressing topics for the planning board. First and foremost right now is ensuring compliance with the MBTA communities law, minimizing the negative outcomes that come from that, or that could come from that. We've got an external deadline associated with that. That's something that we don't control. And so that's a deadline that we have to meet if we're going to maintain compliance. So that in my mind is the most important item. The second two, or the second and third items really are somewhat related. The second one really is enabling the development of affordable and accessible housing for aging Duxbury residents. As has been pointed out, Duxbury is an aging town. People are getting older. I'm getting older, and I'm going to need some of that housing myself at some point in the future. So that's going to be, I think that's critically important for the zoning board to focus on. And then the third really is simplifying the process for permitting the creation of accessory dwelling units. We need to be able to develop ADUs by right within town. That I think is critically important, especially with respect to providing affordable options for aging residents. If folks want to have an aging parent or aging parents live with them, there's really no better way to do that, in my mind, than to have an ADU added onto your house if you can afford it and you have space to do that. And so I think simplifying the process to allow people to do that by right is something that the planning board really does need to focus on.
Thank you. This question, we have two more questions, and I'd like to have enough time for a closing statement. So this week we could kind of have a lightning round. I think we can just answer the question. So here it is. Planning board members are asked to serve as an active liaison to at least one local committee. Which of the following would you be interested in liaising with and why? Coastal Resiliency Task Force, Community Preservation Committee, Economic Advisory Committee, MBTA Advisory, Metropolitan Area Planning Council, Old Colony Planning Council, Open Space Committee, South Shore Coalition, or the Town of Duxbury's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Steering Committee. And we're going to start with Mr. Carpenter.
I am presently liaison to CPC through Historical Commission, and I would like to continue in that role. Also very interested in the Economic Development Committee because I see a great interaction there potentially.
Thank you, Mr. Ray.
Sure. I would like Community Preservation Committee. Seen the direct, living on Lowell Street, I saw the direct benefit of it when Simmons Farm, when they used funds to buy that. The neighborhood would have looked a lot different if that didn't go through. And then the second one be the Open Space Committee. I think that has a huge impact on the fabric of the town and all the various open space in town.
Thank you, Ms. Roy.
So the South Shore Coalition, I read through the mission statement. It really speaks to me. I would absolutely do that one.
So again,
I'd like to liaise closely with the MBTA committee, and then also with the CPC. I think those two can be closely related, particularly if CPC funds are going to be used for development on the sites that we've identified for MBTA zoning.
Mr. Carle.
I think the Resiliency Task Force and the planning board need to be intimately involved with one another. And so the Resiliency Task Force, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, because there are forces much larger than us that affect us, and that would be critical to be involved with too. And then the Economic Advisory Committee, I have a background in economics. So.
Thank you. All right, so the last question, and it is one that we have touched on quite a bit here, but and this question is submitted to the library from a community member. Do you support creating more housing diversity in Duxbury? Why or why not? And if yes, how would you advocate for it if you were elected to the planning board? And I think it's you, Mr. Ray.
Is it me? To quickly answer, yes. I think we do need more housing diversity in town. We've all kind of touched on it. The demographics of the town is changing. Demographics of the town is changing. I believe Doug made a good point on accessory dwelling units for aging parents or grandparents that may want to live on the same property. I have that in my family, not here in Duxbury, but in my parents' house. My grandparents lived there with my parents. So it's a critically important aspect. The second one is the MBTA, the Community Act is coming. It's a train that's coming down the pike. Needs to be implemented by the end of 2024. You've seen what's happened with the state of Milton and is now subject to litigation with the state. And if we fail to implement it, we lose our ability, the town of Duxbury loses our ability to access the valuable monetary grants from the state that will then have a negative impact on what the planning board and what we can do development wise. So I do think housing diversity needs to be top of mind in terms of planning board's objectives.
Thank you. Mr. Roy.
I would say it really depends. I'd like to see a study first to understand the impact that it has on our school system, on our police, on our fire, and utilities. So once we understand that, then we can go from there. Then we can plan proper housing in the proper places. But until we see a study on that, I can't say yes or no.
Thank you. Mr. Gantt.
Absolutely. I want to see increased diversity of housing within the town of Duxbury. And that's really focused on two things. Number one, I keep coming back to it, but it's really going to have a huge impact on us. The MBTA communities in the areas that we're zoning for that, there's going to be a lot more diversity of housing that's going to come as a result of that. And then also really allowing people to develop the ADUs and then having more more age-restricted senior housing in town. I think those three things are really the areas where I'd want to see greater diversity within the housing stock.
Thank you. Mr. Carle.
Well, good or bad, it's an obligation, so it will happen and we should respond intelligently to it. I tend to think it's a good thing, but the devil, of course, is in how you do it. As I mentioned, I grew up in Brookline, when my parents also did. My parents were growing up in Brookline, which, as you know, I grew up walking distance from Fenway Park. When they were children in the 1920s, there were literally farms walking distance from Fenway Park. There were cows that were herded through Brookline Village, where I lived, to the slaughterhouses in Alston for slaughter. It was that rural a town. Brookline ain't that way today. So development is good. Diversity is important. The density of housing that one chooses is critical. But much as I love Brookline, I don't want Duxbury to slide inevitably or unconsciously that way by meeting various real and legitimate mandates. So I would seek to foster the diversity that's beneficial and necessary while maintaining density and rural aspect at the same time.
Thank you. Mr. Carpenter.
The question is, do I support housing diversity and why or why not? Well, yes, support housing diversity. Why do I support housing diversity? Because it's an acknowledged fact that seniors are forced to move out of town because larger houses and tax bills in particular are unaffordable on a fixed income as the taxes rise. And young starting families have trouble moving into town or buying property in town. And the professionals who work in town actually have difficulty being able to live here. And these are all injustices. They don't support a rich social fabric in the town. So the challenge then is, how, but it's a quick answer, so I won't get into it. But I do want to point out that it is happening now. The Laurel Street property is proposed for a green homes development of small cottage style homes for seniors. And Millbrook has a large scale multifamily planned.
Thank you. I think everybody answered, right? Okay, so we're going to do some closing statements. And we'll start with you, Ms. Roy.
Okay, again, my name is Lauren Sirois. I hope to bring balance to the planning board if I am elected. I will admit that I do not know everything. I do not know every bylaw, but I will do my due diligence. I am a hard worker and my passion is for the planning board.
Thank you. Mr. Gantt.
Thank you, Amy. Yes, so again, my name is Steve Gantt, and I'm very excited about the possibility of serving on the planning board for the town of Duxbury. Having lived within town for 26 years, I plan my last move going to be to a small plot of land somewhere between Tremont Street and Mayflower Street. That'll be the last move that I make. I really want to focus on what's most important to Duxbury right now. That is the MBTA Communities Law. That is building the town's resilience, and that's building the town for the future, an aging future for Duxbury, where the residents are going to be aging. I want to make sure that the town is prepared for that. I want to make sure that we're allowing as much as we possibly can to allow people to age in place, and making it as simple as possible to allow them to age in place when people want to add accessory dwelling units. And I want to make sure that the development that we have in town as a result of the MBTA Communities Law is as consistent with the rural character of the town to the greatest extent it can possibly be. And I would look forward to your vote if you see fit on March 23rd. And I would look forward to serving the town in this capacity. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Carle.
Yeah, I'm Glenn Carle. I think all of us are here because we have the will and believe we have the ability to serve effectively on the planning board or serve the town. I think that the process has been, whether I win or lose, inspiring, actually. The people sitting to my right, I don't know if everyone can see, and one virtually, I find truly, it sounds saccharine perhaps, but it is inspiring to me that such knowledgeable and qualified people are stepping forward. And so I don't think there can be really, the town cannot lose, so some of us are going to have to. I think that I would look forward to trying to harmonize the environmental resiliency, energy pressures and needs on the town in a way that helps maintain the semi-rural character of Duxbury.
Thank you. Mr. Carpenter.
Yeah, Robert Carpenter, or Taggart Carpenter, I go by Tag. And I'd like to ask for your vote for the planning board because of my deep municipal experience, familiarity with the way the bylaws actually get changed through town meeting. And I want to be a catalyst. It's the height of irony because I'm the kind of person who hates change. I like things to stay just the way they are. Stability, security, consistency, those are my watchwords. So for me to be here, you know, advocating that we revise the bylaws heavily, that we change programs, that we accelerate the pace of economic development, I'm a little confounded myself, but I see the need. I see that it has to happen, and I think we have to do it very carefully. A lot of legwork and back work has to happen for just the right things to come over the transom when the time comes.
Thank you. Mr. Ray.
Great, thanks. I think we're all fortunate to live in a town like Duxbury. And I think one of the driving forces is the volunteerism throughout the community. To echo what Glenn was saying, I mean, just the 6 or 5 of us here tonight, it's pretty impressive. And this is just for one board. So the town is in good hands moving forward, and the ability of its, you know, the willingness of its members and its residents to volunteer. To that point, the reason I'm here is, you know, I've been in town for 14 years with my family. We intend to live here, retire here, and I've been searching for, you know, a position where I think I could give the most value back to the town. Having been a real estate attorney for almost 20 years, I felt like the planning board is a very good fit for my knowledge, skills, and experience, and the best way for me to contribute and give back and give something towards the future development of a town that I intend to live in for many years, and hopefully my kids do too.
Great. Well, thank you. I want to thank the library, Martha, for hosting this forum. I want to thank all the candidates. You're all winners because you put yourself out here to do this. So we thank you very much. And we hope that this was helpful to the voters. I know it was helpful to me. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
That's good. Thank you, everybody.
Hi, I'm Kristen Beth. I'm on the planning board. I want to thank you all so much. We really appreciate the people in the town really appreciate you raising your hand and offering to volunteer. So thank you. One thing I did want to mention though is that there are 2 spots that people will be voting for, but we actually have a 3rd spot. So even if you don't win the election, there will be a need for another one. And with the process for that is you actually the planning board and the select board have a joint meeting, and they actually interview candidates that the select board votes. So they're actually three spots.
All right,
Thank
so
you.
thank
Great,
you
thanks.
for that, Kristen, that's good, thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks all. Good night.